Hello, everyone, and I'm very excited to have Lisa Reber with us here now. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
I'm Lisa Reber. I've been dyeing since 96, so 27 years or something like that. Started quilting a couple years before that. Uh, I tell people I will dye anything that can't run away. Uh, you don't want to dye your pets.
I've seen cat painting where
Oh,
people have painted them with vegetable dyes, of course, so that they're safe to lick. But yes, the poor cats, they just lose
yeah.
their dignity at that point. But yes, I agree with you. So who was it that got you into quilting? How did that start?
I My grandmother and my mom quilted something with 1930s prints in the 1930s.
Oh,
And so there, we've always done stitching and stuff. So there's always a little thing in the back of my mind. But then I tell people that it's because of the ghosts. And that's actually a picture that was taken up here on the third floor. The lady who's standing is Pastor Krause's wife, because this house used to be the church parsonage. And they did their quilting bees here instead of in a church hall.
mm.
And I practically started quilting on that very spot. And it was in that room. So was it ghosts? I don't know, but I blame them sometimes. And I
Oh,
blame my
wow.
sister for getting me started dyeing, because when she came home from college in 1968 or 69, we gave it a try and then didn't do anything with it for oh, almost 30 years.
And were you tie dyeing back then? Is that the
Yeah, that was you're too young. Uh, yeah, tie-dye was, really all the rage in college. And unfortunately we used RIT, which you don't really want to use RIT, not
no, is it not? I must admit, I dyed something recently and used RIT. Is it not a good one?
it's accessible because a lot of times you can find it in the grocery store, but
Yeah.
RIT tries to be all things to all fabrics.
Mm,
So it's trying to dye cotton and silk and poly. Well, they've back in the day there was only one RIT. Now there's two, one for synthetics. So they wised up a little bit, and it tries to do everything and does nothing well.
yes.
So
Yes. I know the color is not particularly permanent in some things that I've experienced. So you've obviously got a lot of background in quilting and in dyeing. What prompted you to start your business?
I was taking hand applique classes with a lady named Jane Townswick, who kind of introduced using batiks in traditional Baltimore album quilts. You know, who to think of that?
Yeah.
And batik fabrics are really great because they're pretty tightly woven,
Mhm.
and you can do needle turn to your heart's content. And I was bringing in and working with my own hand dyes, and my fellow students are like, "Would you sell that?" So I did a little bit and did a little bit more, and then did a lot and set up at a couple of quilt shows. And the rest is history, as they say. To coin a phrase,
Absolutely. So had you been dyeing your own quilt fabric for a long time before that?
oh, it's all a blur. Probably 5 or 6 years I had been dyeing just for myself. I tended to do it. It was like the post-holiday depression set in.
Mm.
It's like, I'm going to dye something. And oh, it's a great antidote.
Oh, wonderful. And I mean, things must have like different techniques and so on have come in and that you've learned over the years. How have you gained all this knowledge of everything?
Books to start. There's, a shelf full behind the backdrop. And I took my first dye class up at Pro Chemical and Dye. And right now they're not offering classes, and then I found out about a teacher who teaches at Nancy Crow's workshops in Ohio. And she does just books of color samples and a lot of good fundamentals in every class. So you can be, complete beginner and come away with 1,043 color swatches in a week.
Wow.
It's really cool. Altogether, I toted it up for this interview because I really didn't know. I've done something over 650 hours in the past 17 years.
Wow.
And I love it.
And I know we're going to look at some examples later on, but what are some techniques that you've learned recently that you've really loved?
Oh, well, because I was doing that hand applique, stitching and then drawing it up and putting dye on it is just, I could do that the rest of my life for certain. I'm actually taking an independent study for a week. The teacher I was talking about is Carol Soderlund, and I'm doing a week with another book of colors, and then I'm doing a week of independent study, and I'm going to take a pile of little stitched, I have a smocking pleater, like ladies, for their little grandbabies' dresses, and I have a great niece. I don't know, it might be something there, but the machine lets you turn out a lot of stitched fabric in a short amount of time. So I'm making a bunch of samples like that, and then I'm going to put them into like yellow, and then I'll pull up some of the threads and I'll put it into red, and I'll pull up some more threads and I'll put it into blue, and maybe if there's any more threads, and just do some sequential layered dyeing. And I just want to see what would happen. There's a lot of what if in dyeing, and I always tell people it's a real opportunity for lifelong learning, because we're only talking about cotton so far.
Right.
My elephant quilt, which you'll see in a minute, the elephant part of it is made out of polyester, and silk and wool. One of the quilts that I don't have a good detail on, I'm sorry, but it has velvet, which is silk and rayon, and wool, and I didn't dye it, but there's taffeta in one or more of the quilts with hand applique.
Oh, lovely.
Because why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So working with different types of fabric, as well as, I think you mentioned before we started recording that the one of your elephant quilts has got the Fimo clay in it as well.
Right.
Polymer clay. That's fascinating, combining all those different elements together. And I just want to go back. You mentioned a smocking machine. Is this like a special sewing machine specifically for smocking, or how does that work? I've never heard.
It's a. I'm sorry, I didn't know I needed a visual aid here.
No, not at all.
It's a gizmo. It's about 14 inches long, and it's got rollers, and it's got these really weird needles that are straight, and then they have a dip in them. That dip goes around one of the rollers, and you can space them, I don't know, centimeter apart, less than half an inch. And you can put in, 3 or 24 and get a really lots and lots of lines of stitching. And you put a small piece of fabric, you can't do huge wide things. You put it in between these rollers, and you have a thread going to each one of the needles, which, it seems obvious, but it's kind of interesting threading 24 needles if you really. Yeah. And then you crank, and the fabric goes through these rollers. I've got to talk with my hands, I'm sorry. It goes in between these rollers and onto the needle, and the rollers have notches in them, so the fabric is forced up and down and up and down, and it goes on the needle that way. So yeah, and then, just keep stitching and stretching and stitching, and, it gathers up on the needles. And then when you're all done, you take the threads and just pull and pull and pull. And it really makes a nice, it's a time saver compared with doing it all by hand. And it looks different because if you do it by hand, your stitching is never going to be precise and regimented like it is with the smocking pleater. So it's the same exact, it's just a basic running stitch. And then you do another one next to it and another one. And the patterns it makes are beautiful.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm definitely going to have to look this up. You've mentioned a couple of people already that inspired you early on. Who are some of the people that have inspired you kind of more recently and also in the past?
Oh, I've been Carol Soderlund. I will send anybody to her classes. Take mine first, but if you want to spend more time at it, she's just a master cat herder, because it's 20 grown women and they've got colors to play with, and she keeps them on the straight and narrow and still lets you have fun and make beautiful stuff. And there's some other, Ellen Noble is a dyer and a quilter that these are kind of the pantheon of dyeing quilters. I'm not sure, I can't tell you what museums Ellen's quilts are in. Annalisa Hedstrom is another.
I'll put links to all these people in the interview
Okay.
notes so that others
Carolyn Grotrian, I took a class with last year. She's just does beautiful work, and it's stitched shibori, so yeah.
Oh, wonderful. And do you, at this point, how big is your stash, I guess? Because it's like you must dye all this fabric, and I realize you sell a lot of it as well, but how your own personal stash?
Oh, honestly, it's about the same state it was 5 years ago, because I just dye all the time and I rarely quilt. But the backdrop behind me is in front of all my stash, and it's wow. I have a very good indulgent woodworking husband. You can see I've got some baskets. Beautiful. Just sort of see the top of them there. Yeah, there's a bunch of them.
I feel like woodworkers make excellent quilt husbands.
Totally.
Because yes, there's just so many useful things, quilting frames or hanging rods or whatever it is. What are some of the things that you've achieved that you're most proud of over the years?
I got a couple of ribbons in shows, which is exciting. I think, and honestly, getting to teach at quilt shows is kind of cool. I haven't done it my last show was in 2020, and I'm getting older. Schlepping all that stuff just sort of lost its attraction.
Yes, no, I can understand. But you mentioned your courses that you have, and of course you're teaching a workshop for us for Quilt 2024. Tell us about the workshop.
Oh, well, I just love sharing a dyeing with people, and I try to keep it under control. I try to make sense. I have just some little samples that I made. I haven't shot the but they're the same colors that I'm going to be using in the ones of the sections. This is a different.
Oh, beautiful.
But yeah, this is just, there's twice as much dye on every next piece of fabric than the one before. So it's a really great way to make a value gradation. And there's a handout. I'm not sure we're going to have time, but fat quarters of a rainbow of colors.
Yeah, and they're kind of glowing as well.
They are bright. That's sorry, the colors I was working with. If you, that's number 10. No, these are actually about the same. Number 10, those two were more or less the same recipe,
Wow.
but there's a certain number of pure dyes, and that's the really bright blue, and this is the navy. So you're just going to get a darker green. And
I see what you mean. Yes, yes. Oh, well, it's fascinating, and I'm so looking forward to watching the workshop and hopefully making along with it. Um, are there things that you're planning to do next year? And we're recording this in November, and it'll be going live at the start of 2024. Are there plans that you have for the year ahead?
I'm really looking forward to the class I'm taking for 2 weeks, and I have a subscription box program. Short advertisement.
Yeah.
A lot of the quilt makers that go to classes with Nancy Crow at her workshops in Ohio, that woman, not to name names, no, she does use my fabric, and she refers her students to me.
Oh, lovely.
And I'm really blessed.
Yeah.
So I do a subscription box with just 5 values instead of the blues I showed you, where there's 10 different ones. A really dark to a really light there, and 3 values in between. There's actually a couple lighter ones, but they probably do not show up well on camera.
Just vaguely see. Yeah.
There's times when you use something that's just not white, it's just a little off, and it really adds to the quilt. And so I've got 14 people. It's not a massive number, but to do that, I have 3 or 4 wringer washer machines in the basement.
Gosh.
The other thing hubby is very good at is actually diagnosing what's wrong with this machine that's 50 years old. So there's 2 are running really well. One needs a major rebuild, and the other one I'd give it a little minor repair.
No,
Wasn't quite enough. It needs a little more work.
I can believe that's a vital skill, the maintenance of them. You've got this gorgeous piece of fabric in the background as well, with the pale blue. How did you get the texture on that one?
Well, that's one of the sections. This is actually a gauze. Well, it's maybe see my hand through it. What's behind that is this boring piece of white fabric, but it's just a matter of scrunching it up into the container. That's something over 3 yards and 54 inches wide. It's a little wider than regular quilt fabric. It went into a kitty litter tray. So
without the litter, I hope.
Yeah, I've never had a cat, so but you can work with a dishpan, which is yay big, but it's not going to take 3 yards of pretty much anything unless it's chiffon. So, and then for even bigger pieces, I use those long underbed boxes. You can get yards and yards and yards of fabric in those, but then it's how I do a lot of this.
I suppose it must make you look at containers in a whole new way. How much fabric could you dye in them?
And well, a lot of, if you're getting into printing or stamping things, it's I've gone dumpster diving because there was something cool that would make a neat pattern.
Well, and you've also, I read, made use of snow as well in your
Yep.
dyeing. And I suppose, I mean, I know you've got a slideshow to show us, and I believe it's got some of this snow dyed fabric in that. Can we take a look at that?
Sure. Let me go to share.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, well, that's what was left open. Sorry.
That's perfect. We can see that. This is the amazing elephant quilt.
That is the elephant.
Mm-hmm.
He is, I think he's 30 inches tall. Did I have he's polyester Georgette. That's the polymer clay. Oh, come on, click. Polymer clay for the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrapped the polyester on a pipe.
Oh,
like that.
Oh, interesting.
And you scrunch it up. It's another shibori technique. And you can see these faint streaks.
Like striations, yes.
Yeah,
Very geological.
I had to flatten it out for the ear because the wrinkles are great for almost all of it. And I wanted the ear to be flat and relatively smooth. And when I did that, these lovely marks showed up. And then I also dyed some polycarbonate, which is what they make bulletproof signs out of.
Oh.
And I soaked a piece of cheesecloth in the kind of dye that you use for polyester, and then pressed that onto the 1/8 inch thick plastic stuff and heated it. It's the same kind of dyes that if those of us of a certain age did heat transfers for cross stitch patterns before counted cross stitch was a thing. So you could transfer embroidery designs onto polyester fabric. But it's a heat transfer process. So the dye came out of the cheesecloth and got sucked into the plastic when it was warm and soft. And then when it cools off, it's stuck. Same thing with the fabric. And the background is a piece of snow dye.
It's such a fascinating technique with the snow dye because obviously it's enhanced here with the machine embroidery that you've added. But it's just so almost gentle in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, it's very flowery. Purples do very well, and they just look like a pile of hydrangeas. Let's see. There is another. That's a detail of this piece of snow dye.
Wow.
I'd learned from a blogger called Bunk's Blog was the name of it. I work with liquid dyes and I use actual snow because I'm cheap and I'm not running out to buy bags and bags of ice. So last winter here in north of Philadelphia, we got no snow. So I have to do it when I can. But I pour liquid dyes onto the snow. Back up, Lisa. Start with a screen. You put the fabric on the screen. You put the snow on the fabric and you pour the dye onto the snow and it trickles down and it leaves these wonderful patterns behind. So for that's not my favorite color in the upper left corner, but for the most part, they're just really intricate is probably a good word.
Yeah. There's so many potential uses for something like this. And I love where all the different colors are meeting and different colors are going together. Like even colors you wouldn't have thought would go that well together, like the kind of yellows and pinks at the top. is still, I really love how that effect. But how do you, I suppose you're not able to control where the color is going particularly.
It's like anything with practice, you can get better, but it's always a surprise what you're going to get when it comes out. I've done a lot. I don't have you can sort of see on the elephant, if we back out a little bit more, you can see there's some bands of purple in front of his face and down here as well. But that was because I fan folded it.
Right.
And depending on which edge was up, some of the colors hit the top and other ones sink down to the bottom, and you get different patterns.
And for those of us that don't live in snowy climates, did you say that we can use ice?
Yes, you can use the bags of ice. If you can get chipped ice, there are people that are like lusting after Hawaiian ice shaved ice machines because I could use that for snow dyeing. And there are people that use the powdered dyes, and they put the powders, or they mix the powder with snow and then plop that on. And I'm exposed to enough dye powder in the course of my days that I'm not doing it that way.
You don't want rainbow lungs, I suppose.
Yeah, sinuses.
Yes, no, absolutely. Well, I'd love to see these other items that you got in the slideshow as well.
Sure. I often get asked what was my first quilt, and it's a twin bed quilt. It's the first quilt I started. I made a pair. It's not the first quilt I finished, like a lot of people. And I always tease my audience and say, can you guess what pattern this is? And I did learn to quilt from a book from the library, which is half a block up the street. And I didn't know about value, and I didn't know about what a traditional block pattern might look like, but it's a shoe fly. So, but that's what happens when you put 3 colors instead of 2 into a shoe fly block. And we're sort of on the fringes of the Pennsylvania Dutch world. There's a lot of Pennsylvania German people, but driving cars, and you can't tell them by looking. So our local guild ended up being the shoe fly quilters, and then came back again, and I did a challenge and came up with a little 30-inch square quilt in my own design. And then I've since made it in a 60-inch and in a 90-inch, got 3, 6, and 9. And I did dye all the fabric for that. And I was going for the layered transparency look. So
that's amazing. Did you do the quilting as well?
I did not. A lady named Amy McKeska did it. And I mean, she changed colors to match the foreground fabric. I do have a detail.
Oh my goodness.
It's just stunning.
Well, the piecing is lovely. I mean, you can really see the detail there, like with the tiny little white triangles adding to that transparency effect. But yes, the quilting really does build on the design. I kind of understand now some judges' feedback I got from a recent show I was in, where they were saying that the quilting did nothing to enhance the design. And I'm like, now that I see this, yes, I see what you mean.
Well, it's funny because that quilt, it won a judge's choice at the Machine Quilting Expo up in New Hampshire, I think. And the judges said, it's, really like, I think it was there somewhere anyway. It got it's great, but it's not really mid-century modern inspired, because the quilting is so intricate, and we were looking for spare kind of sparse quilting.
Yes.
If it had been done with the matchstick, which is, We may be over that trend. I'm not sure.
Oh, I don't
but
think so. I think it's still very popular, the match tip quilting. Yeah.
I got a book from Ricky Timms called Convergence Quilts, and it's sort of, take all your fabric, slice it up, and in a structured way, put your slices back together and make the checkerboard. But again, I tell people, do the guild challenge, because in my case, I may never make another quilt that year, but I've got a deadline for the challenge and I'll do it. But it was the challenge this year was circles, and I was still doing a lot of hand applique, but I was able to, it's not beautiful, but I used the eyelet stitch on the sewing machine for the quilting.
Oh, lovely. And how many different pieces of hand-dyed fabric did you use to piece together the background? Because the colors,
that's 2 half-yard pieces. That's all.
The colors are beautiful, though, the way that they, the kind of, it's almost like a shadow, not shadow, what do I mean? Like a tree shadow. Yeah, I guess so.
Dappled
Exactly.
kind of idea.
Yeah.
Actually, that those 2 pieces of fabric were dyed using the same technique and the same dyes, but just in different containers, and they came out slightly different. And it's part of my giveaway. That technique is in the Color by Accident book by Ann Johnston. That is one of the bonus. I'm not sure how you're working the chances, but
one of the giveaways, which is wonderful. Yes.
So, and that really, I didn't mention it. That kind of got me started. This was another quilt. There's a fabric called Radiance, which is woven so it's silk on one side and cotton on the other.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because you can see that this has a bit of a sheen to it.
Yeah. And let me see if you can even, in that light, you can really see where the puckers are. It was only quilted in the black sections. A little too big for the resolution, but you can see it.
Diagonal lines, yeah.
My dear husband said, looking at the back, which was all black, he says, I really like that. It reminds me of a car headliner. It's like, yeah, thank you. I won't tell the quilter.
Because silk and cotton are different types of fiber, aren't they? So how do you dye something that's made up of both?
You can dye silk with Procyon MX type dyes. It's not ideal because they would rather have be dyed with an acid than with a basic, but they'll take it. So I just did, I don't know, a dozen fat quarters and made my half square triangles. And I think I had 3 weeks to get it done in.
Oh gosh, it must have been hard on the eyes because there's such bright colors, and it really, there's so many of them popping.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
I like color, and I have always loved how the jewel tones pop when you put them up against black.
Absolutely. Wow, so effectively, yeah.
And I do have one picture here, which is fabric that I stitched. I think that's about a 22-inch square.
Gosh, so these are tiny stitches.
Compared with doing the hand applique,
I guess
piece of cake. So not really that exciting. Maybe 6 to an inch or something. Totally doable.
And is this from a workshop that you've done, or like where did this come from?
I took the class I took a year ago with Carol Ann Grotrian. Taught me the technique to keep the white areas in between the bands of darker and stitched colors. And it was just, I prepared it and took it along when I took another class, this time with Carol Soderlund. And I forget, I think we were just using, I think it was neutral territory. I won't swear to it, but in the class we got to explore, well, what happens if instead of mixing 2 colors, you mix 3 colors? If you add a little bit of orange to your blue, how far can you push it before you get brown mud?
Right.
So, and if you are making a quilt and you need, here's my shape and it's a bright blue, but if the light is coming here, I need a shadow, I need blue that has been shaded or toned down or flattened, or it's like adding black in paint.
Fascinating. And what's the particular technique called?
Which the stitching?
Yes.
The kind of stitching is called maki aji. I think I may be butchering the pronunciation too. It's, you fold and then you just do a running stitch on the fold. So
lovely. It's such a beautiful fabric. It's really stunning. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to show us?
I had a thought, but it's escaped.
Don't worry. Well, thank you so much for showing us all of these. That was fascinating, and hearing about how they were made. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's now wondering where they can get hold of a load of snow or shaved ice or something. I'm in California, so maybe if I drive over to Tahoe in a month or so, there should be plenty there. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me and for organizing the whole collection of workshops. You must be working your little tail off right now.
It's busy at the moment, but by the time everyone's watching this in January, it should all have calmed down again, ready ahead of the actual workshops going live. But yeah, thank you so much for your time and for sharing with us.
Well, thanks. I live for show and tell, so it's all good.
Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.